I said nothing after my daughter-in-law hit me, in the morning. When she saw who I called, she froze instantly. The slap echoed through my kitchen like a thunderclap, sharp and final. My cheek burned where Lisa's hand had connected, the sting spreading across my face like wildfire. I stood there, frozen, my hand halfway to the counter where I'd been preparing dinner. She was breathing hard, her face twisted with a rage I'd seen building for months but never quite believed would erupt like this. My son Jake stood in the doorway, his eyes averted, his jaw set in that way that told me he'd chosen his side long before this moment. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply looked at Lisa, really looked at her, and something inside me shifted. Something cold and calculating that I'd kept buried for 68 years suddenly woke up. She expected tears. She expected begging. Instead, I touched my cheek gently, feeling the heat beneath my fingertips, and I smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a forgiving smile. But a smile that seemed to unsettle her more than any scream could have. She blinked, stepping back slightly, and in that moment, I saw it, she was afraid. Not of me, not yet, but of something she couldn't quite name. Good. Let her wonder. Let her lie awake tonight trying to figure out what that smile meant. Because while she slept, I would be making calls. And when morning came, Lisa's entire world would begin to crumble, piece by carefully orchestrated piece. I had always been the quiet one. The woman who baked cookies for church fundraisers, who volunteered at the local food bank, who smiled politely when neighbors asked about my family. After my husband Richard died 3 years ago, everyone said how strong I was, how graceful in grief. They had no idea. Richard's death had been sudden, a massive heart attack that took him in the middle of the night. Or so everyone believed. I knew better. I'd seen the envelope that arrived 2 days before he collapsed, the photographs inside, the cruel note attached. Someone had wanted Richard to know about Jake's affair, wanted him to see his son's betrayal captured in grainy surveillance photos. The shock had killed him as surely as any bullet. I'd found the envelope hidden in his desk drawer after the funeral, and I'd known immediately who'd sent it. The handwriting was feminine, the cruelty calculated. It had taken me 2 years to confirm what I suspected, Lisa had sent those photos. She'd been Jake's mistress since his high school years, the dirty secret that Richard had discovered too late. She'd murdered my husband with information, and now she lived in my house, ate at my table, and raised her hand to me. The house was dark when I finally moved from the kitchen. Jake and Lisa had left hours ago, slamming the door behind them, confident that they'd broken me. I heard Lisa's voice as they walked to their car. Just a few more weeks and we'll have the deed transferred. Then we can dump the old bat in Shady Pines and sell this place. Their laughter had drifted through the window, cold and careless. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just another elderly woman too tired and too broken to fight back. They were wrong. I walked slowly to my bedroom, my slippered feet silent on the hardwood floors Richard and I had refinished 30 years ago. Every corner of this house held memories, pieces of a life built with love and sacrifice. And these two parasites thought they could just take it all? I sat at my vanity, looking at my reflection in the dim light. My cheek was red, already beginning to bruise. 68 years old, and this was what my life had become. But as I stared at myself, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who'd survived wars, poverty, and loss. I saw a woman who'd built a business from nothing, who'd put herself through night school while raising a child, who'd secretly accumulated wealth that Jake never even knew about. I saw a survivor. And survivors don't just roll over and die. My phone sat on the nightstand, and I picked it up with steady hands. The contact list scrolled past family, friends, acquaintances. I stopped on a name I hadn't called in 15 years, Marcus Chen. We'd met at a technology conference when I was still running my small accounting firm, before I'd sold it for more money than Jake could imagine. Marcus had been a systems analyst then, brilliant and unconventional. We'd stayed in touch sporadically, and I knew from his holiday cards that he'd retired from corporate work to do something he called freelance digital consulting. But I also knew, from a conversation we'd had over wine at that long-ago conference, that Marcus had skills most consultants didn't advertise. He could find things. Digital things. Deleted things. Things people desperately wanted to stay hidden. My finger hovered over his name for just a moment before I pressed call. It rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered, surprised and warm. Margaret? Is that really you? We talked for 20 minutes. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but I told him enough. I told him about Lisa, about Jake, about the house deed they were pressuring me to sign over. I told him about the nursing home brochure's ID found hidden in Jake's car, about the whispered phone calls ID overheard. And then I told him what I needed, everything. Every email, every text message, every digital footprint that Lisa and Jake had left behind. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that made my heart race. Margaret, if even half of what you're suggesting is true, we're not just talking about elder abuse. We're talking about fraud. Possibly worse. Give me 72 hours. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the bruise on my cheek throb with each heartbeat. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time in 3 years, since Richard's death, I felt something like hope. Jake and Lisa thought they'd won. They thought one slap was all it would take to cow me into submission, to make me sign over everything ID worked for. They'd underestimated me so profoundly that it was almost funny. Almost. Because there was nothing funny about what they'd done, what they were planning to do. I thought about all the small cruelties ID endured over the past 2 years since Lisa convinced Jake to move in with me. The way she'd gradually taken over my kitchen, my living room, my entire life. The way she'd spoken to me like I was a child, rolling her eyes when I forgot something or moved too slowly. The way Jake had transformed from my loving son into a stranger who looked at me with calculation rather than affection. They'd isolated me carefully, subtly. My friends from church stopped visiting after Lisa told them I was becoming confused and needed rest. My bridge club invitations dried up after Jake mentioned I was having trouble managing my finances. They'd painted me as a declining elderly woman, setting the stage for what they thought would be an easy takeover. But I wasn't declining. I was planning. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Pancakes, bacon, fresh orange juice. Lisa came down first, her eyes assessing me carefully, looking for signs of submission or rebellion. I gave her neither. I simply smiled pleasantly and asked if she wanted butter or syrup. She blinked, clearly thrown. "Where's your mark?" she asked, her voice sharp. "The mark from last night?" I touched my cheek absently, where makeup now covered the bruise. "Oh, this? I must have bumped into something. You know how clumsy I get." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Jake appeared moments later, and the 3 of us sat down to eat in a silence that felt like a standoff. I could feel Lisa watching me, trying to figure out what had changed. She knew something was different, but she couldn't identify what. That was the beauty of it. They expected me to be broken or defiant, but I was neither. I was simply calm. Eerily calm. It unsettled them both, and I savored every moment of their confusion. After breakfast, as I cleared the dishes, Lisa brought out the papers. The house deed transfer documents, neatly prepared by their lawyer, with convenient sticky notes marking where I should sign. "We really need to finalize this today, Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "For your protection." Jake nodded along, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, Mom. It's the responsible thing to do." I looked at the papers for a long moment, then at them. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. Lisa's face flushed red. "Think about it? We've been over this 100 times. You agreed." "I agreed to consider it," I corrected gently. "And am still considering." I'll let you know my decision soon. They left for work angry, and I knew I'd bought myself more time, but not much. The pressure would increase. They'd escalate. But so would I. I spent the morning doing something I hadn't done in years. I went through my financial records. Really went through them. Richard and I had been careful savers, but more than that, we'd been smart investors. The accounting firm I'd built and sold had netted me nearly $2 million that I'd invested conservatively over the years. Jake knew about some of it, the obvious retirement accounts and the house. But he didn't know about the offshore accounts, the investment properties I owned under my maiden name, the cryptocurrency I'd bought on Marcus' advice years ago that had appreciated spectacularly. On paper, to Jake and Lisa, I was a comfortable widow with a nice house and a modest pension. In reality, I was worth over $4 million. They weren't just trying to steal my house. They were trying to steal my entire legacy, and they didn't even know how much they were after. That made me angry. Not the hot, explosive anger of youth, but the cold, patient anger of someone who'd learned that revenge was a dish best served with meticulous planning and perfect timing. By noon, Marcus called back. "Margaret," he said, his voice tight with something between excitement and disgust, "you need to see this. Can you get to a computer? I'm sending you files. Encrypted. The password is Richard's birthday." I booted up my laptop, my hands surprisingly steady. The files arrived moments later, and I opened them with Richard's birthday, 041952. What unfolded across my screen was worse than I'd imagined. Text messages. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Between Jake and Lisa, dating back 5 years, long before Richard died. They'd been planning this for half a decade. The messages were cold, calculating, devoid of any affection or remorse. Jake's texts to Lisa about me were clinical: "She's stubborn but physically weak. Won't be hard to pressure once we isolate her properly." Lisa's responses were even worse: "Your father is the problem. He'll never agree to cutting her off. We need to handle him first." I felt my blood run cold as I scrolled through messages dated just before Richard's death. Lisa had orchestrated everything. She'd hired someone to document Jake's previous affairs, then sent the evidence to Richard, knowing his heart condition, knowing the shock would likely kill him. She'd murdered my husband deliberately, and Jake had either known or suspected and done nothing. Further down, I found their plans for me. Detailed, methodical plans. Shady Pines. Nursing home had been contacted. They'd inquired about memory care units and costs. They'd researched how to get someone declared mentally incompetent. They'd even discussed dosing my food with medication to make me appear confused during a psychiatric evaluation they'd already scheduled for next week. They were going to drug me, have me declared incompetent, take power of attorney, and lock me away. Then they'd sell everything, split the money, and I'd die alone in a facility while they lived off my life's work. The texts got worse. Lisa joking about how long I'd last in the nursing home: 6 months, tops. Old people give up fast when they're abandoned. Jake's response: "Good. The sooner the better. Insurance alone is $300,000. There was more. Marcus had found Lisa's financial records too. She'd been embezzling from the private school where she taught, skimming from the PTA fund for years. Thousands of dollars, taken from parents who'd trusted her with their children's field trip money and sports equipment funds. She'd been laundering it through fake vendor accounts, thinking she was clever. But Marcus found every transaction, every fake receipt, every fraudulent invoice. And there was something else. Something that made my hands shake as I read. Lisa had been having an affair with Jake's best friend, Tom Richardson. Recent affair, still ongoing. The messages between them were explicit, mocking. They laughed about Jake's gullibility, about how easy it was to manipulate him. Tom even knew about the plan to institutionalize me and thought it was hilarious. These people, all of them, thought I was nothing. Thought I was just an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved. I sat back from the computer, my mind racing through possibilities. I had evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, embezzlement, and possibly even negligent homicide if Richard's death could be tied to Lisa's actions. I could go to the police right now, hand this over, and let the justice system handle it. But would they? Lisa was charming, well-connected in the community. Jake was my son, and the courts might see me as a vindictive mother. The evidence was damning, but was it enough to guarantee they'd face real consequences? And more importantly, would legal consequences satisfy the burning need for justice that consumed me now? No. The law was too slow, too uncertain. I needed something more immediate, more devastating. I needed them to feel the same helplessness, the same terror, the same absolute destruction of everything they'd built that they'd planned for me. I needed poetic justice. I spent the next 2 days planning. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the same methodical precision I'd used to build my business. I made lists, mapped out timelines, identified pressure points and vulnerabilities. And I made more calls. First, to an attorney in Boston who specialized in creative estate planning. Then to a private investigator in Virginia who Marcus recommended. Then to a journalist at the local paper who'd done a series on elder abuse the previous year. Each call was a piece of a puzzle, and slowly, the picture emerged. Beautiful, terrible, perfect. On the third night after the slap, I had dinner ready when Jake and Lisa came home. Pot roast, their favorite. They ate warily, still trying to figure out my game. As we finished, Lisa pushed the deed papers across the table again. Decision time, Margaret, she said flatly. Either you sign these tonight, or we start proceedings to have you evaluated for competency. Jake will testify that you've been declining. Our doctor will confirm it. You can do this the easy way or the hard way. I looked at both of them for a long moment, these people I'd loved and sacrificed for, these strangers wearing familiar faces. Then I stood up, walked to my purse, and pulled out a folder. I have something I'd like both of you to look at first, I said quietly, laying it on the table. It was a single page, printed that afternoon. A legal document, stamped and notarized. Jake picked it up first, his brow furrowing as he read. His face went white. Mom, what is this? What did you do? Lisa snatched the paper from his hands, and I watched with satisfaction as her expression shifted from confusion to shock to absolute horror. It was an adoption decree. Filed 3 days ago, processed with unusual speed thanks to some well-placed donations and an attorney who specialized in expedited family court matters. I had legally adopted someone as my daughter, granting her full inheritance rights, superseding any claims Jake might have had. The name on the document made Lisa stagger back from the table, Janet Marie Morrison. Lisa's birth mother. The woman Lisa had abandoned. 15 years ago when she got sober and tried to reconnect. The recovering addict Lisa had publicly disowned, telling everyone she was dead. ID found Janet in a halfway house in Pittsburgh, struggling but surviving. ID met with her, told her some of what her daughter had done, and offered her something no one else ever had, a real family. Shed wept when I explained I wanted to legally make her my daughter, give her the love and support Lisa had denied her. She signed the papers the same day. You're insane, Lisa whispered, her face ashen. You can't do this. You can't just adopt some random person. I smiled. She's not random. She's your mother. The woman you've spent years pretending doesn't exist. And as of 3 days ago, she's my legal daughter, with full inheritance rights. This house, my accounts, everything? All goes to Janet when I die. You get nothing. Jake found his voice, though it shook. Mom, this is crazy. We can contest this. We can prove you weren't in your right mind. Oh, can you? I asked pleasantly. Because I have 3 separate psychiatric evaluations from the past week, all stating I'm perfectly competent. I also have my attorney's declaration that I understood completely what I was doing and why. And I have something else. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Their voices filled the kitchen, crystal clear, captured on the recording app I'd been running for weeks. Lisa's voice, she's too stubborn to die naturally. We'll have to speed it up. Jake's voice, how long do you think she'll last once we get her into Shady Pines? Lisa's laugh, 6 months, tops. The recording continued, playing every vile conversation, every cruel joke, every calculated plan. I'd edited it down to the worst hits, a greatest hits album of their monstrosity. 5 minutes of their own words condemning them. When it finished, the silence was deafening. Lisa recovered first, her face twisting with rage. You were recording us? That's illegal. Actually, I said calmly, in Pennsylvania, only one party needs to consent to a recording. I was that party. This is perfectly legal. And I have hours more where this came from. Jake slammed his hand on the table. You've been planning this? You've been playing us? I stood up, looking down at them both. Planning this? No. I've been documenting your plan. Your plan to drug me, declare me incompetent, steal my home, and abandon me to die alone. Your plan to murder my husband by sending him information designed to shock his weak heart. Your plan to steal from children's education funds, to commit fraud, to destroy me. I didn't plan any of that. You did. The next part was my favorite. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a stack of envelopes. There were 23 of them, each addressed to a different person or organization. I spread them across the table like playing cards. This one, I said, touching the first envelope, goes to the principal at Lisa's school, along with complete documentation of the embezzlement. This one goes to the police, with evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. This one goes to the state licensing board, because teachers who steal from children probably shouldn't be teaching. This one goes to your church, Jake, where you've been serving as a deacon. I'm sure they'll be interested to know your character. This one goes to Tom Richardson's wife, with every text message between Tom and Lisa. And this one? This one goes to the local news station, where a very eager reporter is waiting to do a story on elder abuse and financial exploitation. I've already given them an advance copy of the recordings. Lisa lunged at me, but I stepped back smoothly. Touch me again, and I'll add assault charges to everything else. You want to know why I smiled after you hit me? Because I knew. I knew that was the moment you'd sealed your fate. You thought you'd broken me, but you'd just given me proof of physical abuse to add to all the rest. They stood there, frozen, trapped, as I continued. But hey, race the thing. I'm not actually a monster, despite what you might think. So I'm going to give you a choice. You can leave this house right now, tonight, with nothing but the clothes on your backs. You'll sign documents relinquishing any claim to my estate. You'll never contact me or Janet again. And in exchange, I won't mail these letters. I won't press charges. I'll let you slink away and try to rebuild your lives somewhere else. Or, Jake croaked. Or, I said pleasantly, you can fight me. Contest the adoption, hire lawyers, make a public spectacle. And when you do, every single piece of evidence I have goes public. The recordings. The text messages. The financial fraud. The affair. Everything. You'll both go to prison, Lisa will lose her teaching license, and your names will be synonymous with elder abuse in this community for the next 20 years. Your choice. You have 10 minutes to decide. They chose to leave. I knew they would. Bullies always fold when confronted with real consequences. They packed hastily, throwing clothes into suitcases, their hands shaking, their faces pale. Lisa tried one more time to negotiate, to threaten, but I simply held up my phone with the recording app open, and she fell silent. They were gone within the hour, Jake's car disappearing down the street into the night. I stood in my doorway, watching them go, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction. Just exhaustion. And something else. Freedom. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for years. I walked through each room, touching furniture, running my hands along walls, reclaiming my space. In Jake's old bedroom, now the guest room, I found more evidence of their planning, notebooks full of calculations about my net worth, research on nursing homes, printouts about legal incompetency. They'd been thorough. But not thorough enough. I burned it all in the fireplace, watching the papers curl and blacken, watching their plans turn to ash. The next morning, Janet arrived. She was nervous, her hands twisting a tissue, her eyes uncertain. I'd arranged for a car service to bring her from Pittsburgh, and she stood in my doorway looking like she expected to be turned away. "You really meant it?" she asked quietly. "You really want me here?" I pulled her into a hug. This stranger who was now legally my daughter, this woman had been abandoned by her own child just as I'd been abandoned by mine. "I really meant it," I told her. "Welcome home." The fallout was spectacular. Even though I didn't mail all those letters, word got out. I learned later that Jake, desperate and angry, tried to file a police report claiming I'd stolen money from him. Big mistake. The police investigated and found all the evidence Marcus had compiled. They found the texts about planning to institutionalize me, the research on medications to induce confusion, the conspiracy to commit fraud. They found Lisa's embezzlement from the school. They found everything. Lisa was arrested 2 weeks later at school, let out in handcuffs in front of students and parents. The local news covered it extensively, the teacher who stole from children to fund a scheme to abuse her mother-in-law. Her teaching license was permanently revoked. She pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud to avoid trial, getting 3 years in prison and 10 years probation. Jake wasn't criminally charged in the end, mostly because his role was secondary to Lisa's, but the civil lawsuits from the school's PTA parents buried him. He declared bankruptcy within 6 months. Tom Richardson's wife divorced him after I sent her copies of those text messages, taking him for everything he had. The three of them, the triumvirate of people who'd planned to destroy me, were themselves destroyed. And I did it with nothing but their own words, their own actions, their own cruelty turned back on them. The church where Jake had been a deacon quietly asked him to leave. His friends stopped calling. He tried to reach out to me a few times, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading to sobbing, but I never responded. Head made his choice when he chose Lisa over his own mother. Head made his choice when he stood silently while she hit me. Head made his choice when he planned to lock me away to die alone. Actions have consequences. Janet and I became genuinely close. She was 52, working hard on her sobriety, attending meetings daily. We cooked together, gardened together, learned about each other. She was artistic, creative in ways I'd never been, and slowly, she began to fill the house with life again. Plants on every windowsill, paintings on the walls, music playing in rooms that had been silent too long. She got a job at the local library and made friends. She blossomed. And watching her heal from her daughter's rejection helped me heal from my son's betrayal. We were two women abandoned by our children, building a family of choice instead of chance. I helped her pursue her GED, then community college. She talked about maybe becoming an art therapist one day, helping other people in recovery. I funded it all gladly, this woman who deserved so much more than life had given her. 6 months after Lisa's arrest, we had a small party. Just us and a few of Janet's friends from her support group, plus Marcus and his wife who flew in from California. We celebrated Janet's 1-year sobriety anniversary, and as I watched her blow out the candle on her cake, surrounded by people who genuinely loved her, I felt something I hadn't felt since Richard died, joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. This was my family now. These were my people. Not the ones biology gave me, but the ones I chose. The house deed never did get transferred to Jake and Lisa. Instead, I worked with my attorney to create an ironclad trust. Janet would inherit the house, but with conditions designed to ensure it stayed in good hands. She could live in it as long as she wanted, but she couldn't sell it for 10 years. After that, if she chose to sell, 50% of the proceeds would go to local elder abuse prevention organizations. The rest of my estate was similarly structured, creating a legacy of helping other elderly people avoid what had almost happened to me. I also established a scholarship fund at the community college in Richard's name, for adult students returning to education later in life. People like Janet. People who'd been knocked down but were fighting to get back up. Richard would have loved that. Head always believed in second chances, in the power of education to transform lives. I like to think that somewhere, somehow, he knew what I'd done, knew that I'd turned Lisa's cruelty into something positive and lasting. The bruise on my cheek faded, but I took photographs before it did, keeping them with all the other evidence in a safe deposit box. Just in case. Just in case Jake ever tried to contest the adoption or the trust. Just in case Lisa got out early and tried to come after me. I wasn't naive enough to think this was truly over. Desperate people do desperate things. But I was prepared now. I would never be caught off guard again. 1 year after that terrible night, I received a letter from Jake. It was forwarded through my attorney, a condition I'd set for any contact. He wrote that Head moved to Oregon, was working construction, living in a studio apartment. He wrote that he was sorry, that Head been manipulated by Lisa, that Head lost his way. He asked, tentatively, if there was any chance for reconciliation. Not for money, he insisted, just for relationship. To know his mother again. I read the letter 3 times, sitting in my garden while Janet tended the roses. I thought about the boy Jake had been, sweet and curious, the teenager had mowed lawns to buy me flowers on Mother's Day, the young man had danced with me at his father's funeral when no one else would. I thought about the man Head become, cold and calculating, willing to betray and abandon me. And I thought about what forgiveness meant. Did it mean pretending nothing had happened? Did it mean allowing him back into my life, risking everything I'd built? Or could it mean something else? Something more limited but still real? I wrote back. It took me 2 weeks to find the right words. I told him I appreciated his apology but that trust, once broken, took years to rebuild. I told him I was willing to exchange letters, to see if there was a person worth knowing underneath the monster Lisa had helped create. But I would not send money. I would not see him in person for at least 2 years. And if he ever contacted Janet or showed up at my house uninvited, all communication would permanently end. His response came a month later. He agreed to my terms. His letter was humble, genuinely remorseful. He talked about being in therapy, about understanding how He'd been groomed by Lisa from a young age, about taking responsibility for his choices even as he recognized her manipulation. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. We began a careful correspondence. Once every few months, He'd write about his life in Oregon, his job, his therapy sessions. I'd write back about the garden, about Janet's progress in school, about neutral topics that didn't cut too deep. It wasn't a relationship, not really. But it wasn't nothing, either. It was a thread, thin and fragile, that might someday grow into something stronger. Or might not. Either way, I'd survive. The true test came 18 months after everything happened. I got sick, genuinely sick. Pneumonia that landed me in the hospital for a week. Janet was beside herself with worry, barely leaving my bedside. And I watched her, this woman had known me less than 2 years, sacrifice her work and sleep and health to care for me. And I understood something profound. Biology didn't make family. Love did. Commitment did. Showing up did. Jake had my DNA, but Janet had my heart. When I was released from the hospital, weak but recovering, I came home to a house filled with flowers and cards. My old bridge club had found out about my illness and descended with casseroles and well wishes. The librarians from Janet's work brought books and magazines. Marcus called from California to check on me. Even the journalist who'd covered Lisa's arrest sent a thoughtful note. I'd thought Lisa and Jake's betrayal had left me alone in the world, but I'd been wrong. I'd never been alone. I'd had community all along, people who cared, people I'd somehow let myself be cut off from. And now, freed from my son's toxicity, I was reconnecting with all of them. My bridge club invited me back, explaining they'd always known something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. My church welcomed me to activities again. My life, which had been shrinking under Lisa's manipulation, expanded again. Bloomed again. I was 70 now, not old by modern standards, and I had decades potentially ahead of me. Decades I would spend living for myself, for Janet, for the community I'd helped build. Not for an ungrateful son and his cruel wife. The final twist came from an unexpected source. 2 years after Lisa went to prison, I received a visit from a woman I didn't know. She introduced herself as Amanda Chin, Marcus' daughter, and she'd brought something remarkable. Her father had continued investigating Lisa out of personal curiosity, and had uncovered something nobody else had found. Lisa had a previous name. Before she was Lisa Morrison, she'd been Elizabeth Carter, a woman wanted for elder fraud in Florida 15 years ago. She'd changed her identity after scamming an elderly couple out of their retirement savings, disappeared, and reinvented herself. The Florida case had gone cold, but it was still active. No statute of limitations on fraud. Amanda, who'd followed in her father's footsteps as a cybersecurity expert, had found the connection and reported it to Florida authorities. They were in the process of filing new charges. Lisa's 3-year sentence in Pennsylvania would be followed by prosecution in Florida, likely adding another decade or more to her time in prison. She would be an old woman herself before she saw freedom again. I should have felt satisfaction at this news, but instead, I felt only a distant sadness. This was who my son had chosen, this career criminal, this serial abuser of vulnerable people. How had I raised someone who could be drawn to such evil? But that wasn't quite fair, was it? I'd raised a good boy. Lisa had corrupted him over years, starting when he was young and impressionable, molding him into her accomplice. He bore responsibility for his choices, absolutely, but had also been her victim in a way. It didn't excuse what had done, but it complicated the narrative of pure villainy I'd constructed around him. His letters continued to arrive, and gradually, they deepened. He talked about his childhood, about moments I'd forgotten, little kindnesses I'd shown him that he remembered. He talked about his father's death, about the guilt he carried for not questioning Lisa's involvement, for suspecting but never investigating, for choosing her over truth. He talked about understanding now that had been groomed, that Lisa had targeted him specifically because Richard was wealthy, because I was vulnerable, because we were marks to her. It was 3 years after the slap when I agreed to a phone call. Janet sat with me, her hand in mine for support, as I dialed Jake's number for the first time in years. His voice, when he answered, was tentative and hoarse. "Mom?" We talked for 20 minutes. It was awkward and painful and halting. But it was real. He didn't ask for anything except to hear my voice, to know I was well. He told me he was proud of what I'd done, standing up for myself, protecting myself. He said he was proud I'd found Janet, given her a chance at family. He said he understood had forfeited his own chance and didn't expect anything from me. And then he said something that made me cry. "I'm sorry I wasn't the son you deserved. But I'm grateful I was your son anyway. You gave me everything good in my life, and I threw it away. I can't fix that. But I can try to become someone who honors what you taught me, even if it's too late for us." Maybe it was the maternal instinct that never quite dies, no matter how badly we're hurt. Maybe it was the years of distance giving me perspective. Maybe it was Janet's influence, showing me that people could change, could heal, could become better than their worst moments. Whatever it was, I found myself saying, "It's not too late, Jake. It's just going to take time." A lot of time. We rebuilt slowly, glacially. Phone calls every few months became phone calls every month. Then twice a month. He never asked to visit, never pushed for more than I offered. After 4 years, I agreed to meet him halfway, in a neutral city, Philadelphia, for lunch. Janet came with me, my daughter supporting me as I faced my son. Jake looked older, weathered by hard work and harder lessons. But there was something different in his eyes, something genuine I hadn't seen in years. We ate lunch in a quiet restaurant, conversation stilted but sincere. He and Janet were polite to each other, carefully cordial. Before we parted, he hugged me, and I let him, feeling the stranger familiarity of my child's embrace. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," he whispered. "Don't waste it," I replied. He promised he wouldn't. Time would tell if he kept that promise, but I found I was cautiously hopeful. People could change. ID changed from victim to victor. Janet had changed from lost to found. Maybe Jake was changing too, from accomplice to accountability. It didn't erase what had done, but it offered the possibility of something beyond punishment and pain. It offered the possibility of redemption. Lisa, by contrast, never sought redemption. She wrote to me once from prison, a letter full of vitriol and accusations. I was a vindictive old woman, she claimed. ID ruined her life over one little mistake. ID turned Jake against her, poisoned his mind, destroyed his love. The letter was so divorced from reality, so lacking in any self-awareness or remorse, that I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered the sound of her hand striking my face, remembered her laughter about my planned death, remembered the envelope that killed Richard, and pity evaporated. I burned her letter unread after the first page. She'd had her chance to be human, and she'd chosen to be a monster instead. That was her burden to carry, not mine. Janet graduated from community college with honors when she was 55 years old. I sat in the audience at her graduation ceremony, tears streaming down my face as she walked across that stage to receive her diploma. Her speech as class representative was about second chances, about how it was never too late to become who you were meant to be, about how family was built not born. She looked right at me when she said that last part, and I knew she understood what ID understood that day I adopted her, we'd saved each other. She'd given me a daughter who loved me, and ID given her a mother who believed in her. It was the best trade either of us had ever made. The years passed, and my health remained good. I walked daily, played bridge weekly, volunteered at the library where Janet worked, and managed my investments carefully. The money ID spent on lawyers and investigators had been worth every penny, but I was still comfortably wealthy, and now I had someone deserving to leave it all to. Jake and I maintained our careful relationship, and eventually, after 6 years, he asked if he could visit Pennsylvania to see me. Not the house, he specified, understanding that was Janet's home now. But maybe we could spend a day together? I agreed, and we met in Pittsburgh, spending the afternoon at an art museum Janet had recommended. Head brought photos of his small apartment in Oregon, his work crew, his therapist's office. He was building a simple life, nothing glamorous, but it was honest work and he seemed genuinely content. More than that, he seemed humble, aware of how far Head fallen and how much Head destroyed. We sat in the museum cafe, drinking coffee, and he finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Mom, how did you do it? How did you survive what we did to you? How did you become stronger instead of broken?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. I survived because I refused to be a victim. ID spent too many years being quiet, being accommodating, letting other people take and take and take. Your father's death was my rock bottom, the moment I realized I was alone and vulnerable. But instead of giving up, I decided to become formidable. I planned. I prepared. I made myself into someone who couldn't be easily destroyed. And when you and Lisa tried to destroy me anyway, I had the tools to fight back. He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I'm glad you did. I'm glad you didn't let us win." I know that sounds strange, but it's true. If you'd just rolled over and let Lisa put you in that nursing home, I think I'd have eventually realized what I'd done, and the guilt would have eaten me alive. But you didn't let us do it. You fought back, and you won, and somehow that makes it bearable. Like you didn't need me to save you because you saved yourself. I reached across the table and took his hand. This man had been my baby, my little boy, my greatest disappointment, and maybe, someday, my son again. You're right. I didn't need you to save me. But I would have preferred you hadn't tried to destroy me in the first place. I know, he said quietly. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it, even though I know I can't. We parted that day with another hug, and this time it felt less like embracing a stranger and more like embracing someone I once knew and might know again. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was progress. And for now, that was enough. The real victory, though, wasn't in Jake's slow redemption or Lisa's imprisonment or even in the justice I'd secured. The real victory was in the life I built after. Janet and I traveled together, taking trips to places Richard and I had always meant to visit but never had. We saw the Grand Canyon, visited New York City, flew to Paris and spent a week eating pastries and visiting museums. We laughed together, cried together, lived together. We were family in the truest sense, the sense that mattered. We chose each other every single day. My bridge club became my social circle again, and I hosted game nights at the house, filling it with laughter and friendship. I reconnected with old colleagues from my accounting firm days and joined their book club. I volunteered at a local senior center, teaching financial literacy classes to other elderly people, helping them protect themselves from the kind of exploitation I'd almost suffered. I turned my pain into purpose, my near destruction into a mission to help others avoid the same fate. The classes were always full, and I heard from students afterwards, telling me how I'd helped them spot warning signs in their own families, how I'd given them the courage to stand up for themselves. Each story was a small victory, a ripple effect from that terrible day when Lisa's hand struck my face and woke something fierce inside me. I also wrote a book. Nothing fancy, just a small self-published memoir about elder abuse, financial exploitation, and survival. I called it The Second Half, Finding Strength After Betrayal. Janet helped me edit it, and Marcus wrote the foreword about digital security for elderly people. We printed 500 copies, mainly to give away at senior centers and libraries, never expecting much. But word spread. The local paper did a story. Then a regional paper. Then somehow it found its way onto a list of recommended reading for social workers and elder law attorneys. We had to print more copies. Then more. It became a small phenomenon, this little book about an old woman who refused to be a victim. I did interviews on local radio shows, spoke at community centers, became a minor celebrity in the world of elder advocacy. It was strange and wonderful and completely unexpected, and every time someone came up to me after a talk to say I'd helped them, I thought of Lisa and Jake and how they'd inadvertently created something beautiful by trying to destroy me. Their evil had been transformed into good, their cruelty into compassion. On the 5th anniversary of the slap, I held a dinner party. Janet cooked, inviting her friends from AA and work. I invited my bridge club, my book club, and Marcus flew in with his wife and daughter. Jake was not invited, our relationship still too fragile for this, but I sent him a message letting him know I was thinking of him. The house was full of people, full of life, full of love. We ate too much, drank wine, told stories, laughed until our sides ached. At one point, Janet pulled me aside in the kitchen while we were refilling drinks. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. For choosing me. For believing in me. For giving me a family." I hugged her tight, this woman who was my daughter in all the ways that mattered. "Thank you for letting me," I replied. "For giving me a reason to keep fighting. For showing me what real love looks like." We stood there for a moment, two women who'd been abandoned by their biological children, who'd found each other and built something better than what we'd lost. The sounds of the party drifted in from the living room, proof that we weren't alone, that we'd built community and connection and purpose. This was my life now. Not the life I'd imagined when I was young and hopeful, planning a future with Richard and dreaming of grandchildren and family holidays. But it was a good life. A full life. A life I'd fought for and earned and deserved. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Janet had gone to bed, I sat alone in my living room with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, peaceful, mine. I thought about that moment 5 years ago when Lisa's hand had struck my face, when I'd stood in my kitchen feeling the burn on my cheek and smiled that cold smile that had frightened her. I thought about the woman I'd been then, scared and alone but refusing to break. And I thought about the woman I was now, strong and surrounded by love, living proof that survival was possible, that transformation was real, that justice could be served with intelligence and patience instead of violence and rage. I touched my cheek where the bruise had been, long faded but never forgotten. It had been my wake-up call, my catalyst, my line in the sand. Everything changed in that moment. Not because I became someone new, but because I finally became who I'd always been underneath, a fighter, a strategist, a woman of steel wrapped in a gentle exterior. Lisa had thought she was breaking me with that slap. Instead, she'd freed me. She'd shown me that I could no longer pretend everything was fine, that I could no longer be passive and accommodating and hope for the best. She'd forced me to become active, to take control, to fight for myself. And in doing so, she'd given me the greatest gift of all, she'd given me back myself. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, this structure that had witnessed so much pain and betrayal but had also witnessed triumph and rebirth. These walls had heard Lisa's cruel laughter and her shocked silence when confronted. They'd heard Jake's weak excuses and his later, halting apologies. They'd heard Janet's first nervous questions and her confident graduation speech. They'd heard me cry and scream and plan and celebrate. They'd held all of it, all of me, and they were still standing, solid and strong. Just like me. I finished my tea and stood, ready for bed, ready for tomorrow, ready for whatever came next. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of my life in the worst possible way, I was stronger than anyone knew, including myself. I could survive betrayal, fight back against injustice, rebuild after destruction. I could choose my family, create my purpose, define my own worth. I could be hit and not break. I could be abandoned and not crumble. I could be 70 years old and start completely over, building something better than what I'd lost. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I passed the framed photograph of Richard that still hung in the hallway. I paused, touching the glass gently. I'd avenged him, in my own way. I'd exposed the woman who'd killed him and ensured she'd never hurt anyone else again. I miss you, I whispered to his image. But I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm actually happy. And I think you'd be happy for me too. The photograph didn't answer, of course, but I felt a warmth in my chest that told me I was right. Richard had always wanted me to be strong, to stand up for myself, to recognize my own worth. It had taken his death and my near destruction to finally learn those lessons, but I'd learned them. And now I was living them every single day. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived, a life well fought for, a future full of possibility. Tomorrow I'd have breakfast with Janet, work in the garden, maybe call Jake and see how he was doing. Tomorrow I'd continue building this life I'd created from the ashes of betrayal. But tonight, I'd simply rest, secure in the knowledge that I was safe, I was loved, and I was free. And if someone had told me 5 years ago, as I stood in my kitchen with a burning cheek and a cold smile, that this was where I'd end up, I might not have believed them. But I would have hoped. And hope, as it turned out, was enough to start with. The rest, the strength and courage and determination, I'd found within myself, where it had been hiding all along, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Lisa's slap had been that moment. Her cruelty had been my catalyst. Her attempt to destroy me had become my origin story, the beginning of the second half of my life, the better half, the half where I lived for myself instead of for ungrateful others. I smiled in the darkness, alone but not lonely, remembering that original smile that had started everything. It was still there, still cold when needed, but now accompanied by genuine warmth too. I'd become complex, multifaceted, someone who could be both gentle and fierce, both forgiving and unyielding, both wounded and whole. I'd become myself, fully and completely, for the first time in my 70 years. The last thought I had before sleep claimed me was simple but profound: I survived. Not just physically, not just financially, but spiritually, emotionally, completely. I survived, and more than that, I prevailed. I won. Not through violence or destruction, but through intelligence, patience, and the courage to stand up for myself when it mattered most. And that victory, quiet and personal and absolute, was worth more than anything Lisa and Jake had tried to steal. Because they couldn't steal this, they couldn't steal my strength, my resilience, my ability to create beauty from ashes and family from strangers. They couldn't steal me. And in the end, that was all that mattered. I was still here, still standing, still fighting, still living. And I would continue to do so for as many years as I had left, making every one of them count, making every one of them mine. This was my life, my story, my triumph. And nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again.